So we're back with lesson 4, part 2. We've used the Express generator to set up our site. I'll have to figure out how my node modules folder made it up to GitHub despite my git ignore. But I'll worry about that later. So our site is up and running, and we can see how when we call our res.render statement, we can pass JSON. I change the value here. And in our HBS template, in our little handlebars template, we get our title variable being rendered here. I also want to show you, these are case sensitive. So for example, if I put in a capital T here and save my change, right? It doesn't throw an error, but it doesn't recognize that variable. My H1 disappears because there is no value called title with a capital T that's being passed to this view. So this variable, it just gets ignored, basically. Now, I'm going to change a couple of things here. There's a couple of things about the naming convention from the Express generator I don't love. One is that it uses this term routes. Really, these aren't routes. These are controllers. So I'm going to rename this folder as well as the references to it. So I'm going to right click. You don't have to do this. This is just my own personal preference. I'm going to right click my routes folder. I'm going to rename it to controllers, which now breaks things in my app.js. So that's okay. So you notice here if I open up app.js on lines 7 and 8, we've got the links to the index and users controllers. So I'm going to modify these. Instead of calling this an index router, I'll just call it index. I'm going to take out the word router, and I'm going to change my paths to say controllers. This should fix my app. Whoops. And then down below, sorry, I've renamed these variables. So I got to make one more change down below. My terminal. So I've changed lines 7 and 8. I've renamed these objects from index router and users router. And I've changed the path to my new folder called controllers. So down here, where we're mapping the paths, again, these variables have to match. So if I call my variables index and users, then the path should be mapped to index and users. When I save those changes, my app should be up and running again. Okay, so I've changed lines 7 and 8, as well as lines 21 and 22. And now my application is back up and running. Now that's just my personal preference. Again, you can completely ignore that renaming. You are free to call that folder routes if you like. I don't like the name routes very much. It is the controllers that handles our application logic, so I prefer to rename it to controllers. Also, it's a little more consistent with what we're used to in working with MVC in the .NET world. So we've got an index HBS view, and we are mapping any paths. If there's no controller specified, then our app just uses the index controller. And our index controller maps any requests at the root and loads our index view. So what I want to do now is go through the process of how would we add a new view, like we want to add an about us, an about this site page. So it would be quite similar in Node and Express as it would be if we were working in ASP.NET. We're going to write a method in the controller to accept the path /about, and then we would want to render an about view. And then we would have to build that view as a template, an HBS template inside of the views folder. So let's go ahead and do that. So in our index.js, in our controller, So get about page. So we'll use our router that gets created on line 2. And when we have a get method, we're going to specify our URL is /about. So when we get a get request at localhost 3000/about, now I'm going to use some of the syntax in the express generator. I'm not quite sure why they haven't updated it. There's two things about this syntax that we can see here that's kind of old and odd. Number one is the generator still uses var for variable declaration. That's kind of old. They should probably be using const or let here. Probably const because these values don't change. The other thing that's a little different is the callback syntax. They're still using this syntax where they use the word function. So this works, but it's not really, we've got a more modern shorthand that we used last week instead. So I'm not going to use the word function. I'm just going to use request and response. The next parameter is optional, so I'm going to leave it out. We don't need the next parameter for right now. So we can either use the word function before our request response parameters, or we can leave it out and we can use our fat arrow expression instead. So these are equivalent. This syntax is older, this syntax is shorter and more modern, but they mean the same thing. It's an anonymous function, it's our callback, where we take in an HTTP request and we send out some kind of response. So what we want to do is load the view that will be called about.hbs. So how do you suppose we do that? What command would we need? We can see it on line 6 to display a view called about. Yeah, thanks, Colton. So we're going to use res.render. And then in single quotes, we're just going to put in about. The HBS extension is not required. And because our app.js, I'm just going to jump over here for a minute, right? It already says our view engine is HBS, and the view names are in the view directory. So we don't have to specify what directory, and we also don't have to specify the extension. It knows to look in the views folder, and it knows the extension will be HBS. So I'll save this new method in our controller. I'll go back to my browser now and we can try it out. So now if I go to /about, we get this. Failed to look up view with the name of about inside the views directory, which is C node job tracker views. So what's happened here? Why did this error occur? There's actually nothing wrong with our controller. Our controller method is actually correct. So this error is expected. How come? Exactly, Matt. Yeah, that's right. Matt and Ralph, and Colton, we haven't created the view. So we can just go and create. I'll go to views. I'll make a new file that I will call about.hbs. And I'll just put on a heading here about this site. So I'm just putting on one line of HTML. And now I'll go back and refresh again because we've got NodeMon restarting. There we go. So making a new link, in effect, and new page, really simple, two-part process. Create a new method in the controller that maps the path we want. And then we use res.render and we name the view. So very similar, again, to what we would do in ASP.NET. We'd make a new method in the controller and it would return a view, typically with the same name. And then we would go and create that view file somewhere in the views folder. So this is mostly correct. It's working now. Notice, look up here at my browser tab though. So on the home page, right, when we're in our index, calling our index view, our browser tab says job tracker. If I go to about, how come it shows the URL? It doesn't show like a search engine friendly page title. Why would that be? Right, so on the home page it says job tracker, which is SEO friendly, but here it just displays our URL. If you take a look at the about and index views, they look similar here. Why is the browser tab different? Right, we haven't passed the title variable. That's right, Matt. So where does that title show up? That's in our layout template. So the generator automatically gave us this kind of starting point, and on line 4, inside the handlebar syntax, it's looking for a variable called title. So on our home page, we are passing this variable called title, so it's displayed in the header. But because we haven't provided any value for title in our about method, let's go back to our controller, it just shows the URL instead, which is obviously not great for SEO. So this title variable, we haven't had to code it. It's here by default. The Express generator already is setting it up to display the page title. So what would we do? How would we include a page title inside of our about method so that we also get an SEO friendly text in our browser tab? Matt, you had the right idea.
How about the description?
Okay, you're close, Chris. It is a description, but that variable needs to have a specific name. So what should we call that variable that we want to pass to our about view? You can see it on line 6. So we need to provide a variable called title when we are loading the about view. And then that variable will get displayed in our browser tab. So after, in our res.render statement, right now we're passing a string, the name of the view to load. But now we also want to pass a JSON object so if we pass in a title variable with a string, that's now going to take care of our page title for SEO. So whatever text comes from the controller, it now shows up in our browser tab. So in your portfolio, in your assignment, what you'll do, you're going to use the express generator to build the application. This method will be here by default. The get at the root that renders the index method and your index.hbs, the express generator is going to build these for you. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to build at least 3 other roots for about, projects, and contact. You can build other roots and other pages if you want, but you'll have a minimum of 4 different get handlers in your index.js. And you'll have a minimum of 4 different HBS templates. You're going to have 4 different views: an index view, an about view, a projects view, a contact view. And again, if you want to make other ones, you're free to make other ones as well. Okay, so your controller will have 4 methods minimum, and you'll have minimum 4. So these HBS pages, they're going to be here by default. You're automatically going to get index, error, and layout. So you'll need to make minimum 3 additional views of your own in the portfolio site. So when we have kind of general, these are just going to be static pages like index and about. So our index controller, it's kind of like the home controller in our ASP.NET site. It served out a static site. It also handled, there was, by default, there was like a privacy policy. So those routes were typically will go in the index controller. But we're also going to want to work with the database. So much like we created separate controllers in ASP.NET for the different tables in our database, we're going to want to do the same thing in Node. So I'm going to make, so our static pages, they can be handled by the index controller. But when we start working with data, we're going to want a separate controller for each table or collection in the database. So I'm going to make an employer's controller, and then we want to load it when the URL is our domain, like localhost/employers. We don't want those methods and views to be handled by our index controller. We're going to make a new one. And we will put all of the logic in a few weeks for doing create, read, update, and delete with our employers. They're going to go in that controller. So inside my controllers folder, I'm going to click on it, right click, I'm going to make a new file in the controllers folder, which I will call employers.js. And I'm going to make it plural because that's the convention, much like in ASP.NET. Our controller names are typically plural, and our model names, which we'll do starting next week, our model names will be singular. So we are going to import express, create an express router in this controller to dispatch HTTP requests. So we'll require express here. So all of our controllers are going to need express. In your assignment, you will not need to build a new controller. Okay, you can just use the index controller for your portfolio. And then I will create a router using express.router. So these are the exact same lines of code. The only difference is I've used const instead of var, right? The exact 2 lines of code in the controller that is built for us. Down at the bottom, we need to export this file so it is public. So the way we do this in Express is we call module.exports. Okay, so this router is going to be a public file. Without this module.exports, this file is private and no other parts of the application can access it. And then all of our methods, all of our route handlers will happen in between. So we're going to declare these things at the top, and then at the bottom of our file, when we've written all the methods, we're going to export it so it can be visible. I will show you with our existing index controller, I'll show you what happens without that module.exports. So again, here's the file that the express generator gave us. We've added this method, which wasn't here, and we just changed the text, but you can see down at the bottom, we are exporting the module. If I comment that out, so this means our index controller is now private. If I go back here and try to refresh, we get this. Router.use requires a function but got an object. Kind of a cryptic error. What does that actually mean? It means because this controller is private, it's not public anymore. When we try to link to it here, it fails. It can't access the file because it's not public. So any models or controllers that we make, we must export them so that we can reference them in other parts of the application. Okay? As soon as I put our module.exports back and save my change, NodeMon restarts, it turns green, and my app is up and running. So our models and controllers, we're always going to use this exports command at the bottom that makes it public. Okay, so in the new controller we're building, we want it to be public as well. So here we're going to use router.get. And again, this is going to be the root path. This is going to be a little bit confusing, but just bear with me. I'll explain why we don't put the word employers in here. And then our usual callback function with request and response. So in this case, we're going to call res.render. And we're going to create a new view called index, but we're going to put it inside a subfolder of views called employers. Again, much like the structure ASP.NET uses. So we can have two views called index, one right in views, but one that's going to be in a subfolder. And we'll put on a title of employers. So there's our first step, is make this method, make the controller, and put in a root get method. So when we click on the employers link, it's going to bring us to this page, which is going to eventually display a list of employers from the database. We'll need to do two more things to complete this. If I try right now to go to /employers, we got 404 not found. This is to be expected. How come we got a not found error here? There's nothing actually wrong with the code we've written so far. I'm pretty confident it's correct. But obviously our process isn't complete. So what are we missing? We're actually missing two things. So we're going to need to create a file, and we're going to need to modify one of our other files that we've already been working with. Any idea which file we'll need to modify? We'll need to make some additions to? Because right now our application, it doesn't know how to interpret this URL, doesn't know what to do with it. So we've created this employers controller, but it's not being called. Which file contains the links and the paths to our controllers? Good guess. Nope. This is a controller itself. Right. Our app.js, our startup file, right on line 7 and 8, this code was already here. It was built in. We modified it a little. So now we're going to add ref to our new employers controller. So I'm going to use const. So we are linking in now. We're referencing our new controller. So that's part of the job. Yep. We've now got a reference. Our application knows. So I can save that change. So I've added line 10. So the links to the index controllers, the generator puts these in, but any controllers that we make, we have to manually add a reference to these. Okay, so Chris, if you changed your folder name like me from roots to controllers, you'll need to change the path in app.js. So app.js is looking for the roots folder, which we've renamed to controllers. So notice on my lines 7 and 8, I've changed the path here from roots to controllers.
Yes. I changed it to controllers and controllers. Copy and
So make sure you save your change.
users, employer, const, employers, require. Yes, and when I save, it always says nodemon app crashed, waiting for file changes before starting.
Okay, so somewhere there is still a reference to roots index. There must be, because if it keeps giving you that error, it's looking for a path. So what you can do is click on edit and find in files and search for roots/index. That should show you, and hit enter, that should show you where your code, where that path is. We may have to look at it when class ends.
Okay,
Try the
I don't
search.
see it.
Okay, so maybe we'll have to look together in a little bit. So we've added our reference to our controller. We have to add one more line of code to app.js. So we've linked it, but now we want to point our application that whenever the URL starts with the path /employers, we want to direct it to use this controller. So this is very similar to what I had you do in your lab. So how did you map URLs in your lab? If you look down around line 24, 25. So right now, requests in the root are handled by the index controller. Requests at /users are handled by the users controller. Thanks, Matt. So now, any URLs that start with /employers, these are going to be handled. So we want to map URL prefixes to the appropriate controller. So these two lines the generator gave us, and then we are manually adding the mapping that says any requests that start with /employers, they're going to be handled by our new controller. Okay, so I've added line 10 and line 27. So now I can go back to my browser. Oops. And we can try again. So notice we got a different error this time. The 404 error is gone. So our application now knows what to do with this URL. It knows to call the employer's controller and to call the get method in the root of employers, which tries to load a view. And just like we have seen this error already, we get failed to look up view because this view file doesn't exist. So our last step here is going to be to create first a directory inside of views called employers. And then inside of there, we're going to create a view called index.hbs. So we're going to make a folder, and then we're going to make a view inside. And then when we hit refresh, our page should load. So inside of view, I'm going to right click views. I'm going to make a new folder called employers, plural and lowercase. So all of the views we build for displaying, for adding, for editing an employer, they're going to go inside this subfolder. We're going to keep those views separate from all the other views in the site. And now that I've got a folder called views and employers, I can make a new file here called index.hbs. And we can display our title variable here because our controller, right, it's passing a variable called title. So if I go back and refresh now, our cannot find view error should go away, and we should get a page with a simple H1 tag. So this failed to look up view, we should have, I think we've resolved this. If we've created the right folder name and right file name, now our page is working. And the title, right, our dynamic value that comes from the server, it's showing up. So there were 3 steps involved. We created an employer's controller, number 1. Number 2, in app.js, we mapped the URL /employers to our new controller. And then step 3 was we created the employer subfolder and view so that when we get a get request at /employers, it loads our view. Now, we're not going to work with the database today. There's 2 more quick things I want to do with this. Starting next week, we're going to bring in MongoDB and we're going to be able to set up employers in the database, look at connecting and querying the database. But for now, I'm just going to mock up some data. Now, we could put it right in the view, but I'm going to mock up a little bit of data, a list of employers. We'll mock it up in our controller and we can pass it to our view. So we'll go ahead and create mock list of employers, pass to and display in view. So I'll create a variable here. I'll just simple array. And we'll just create a little array here. say name. Okay, we'll just create, you can put any values you want in here. So we've got a little array of employers. And now when we're loading the view, not only do we want to pass it the title, which will show up here and here, but we also want to pass the data. So in this JSON object that we're passing, we can pass as many values as we like. So I'll maybe break this up into separate lines so it's a little easier to read. First, we're going to pass the title as a string.
Okay.
And then we're also going to pass our employers list.
Schools.
So we can load the view and we can pass it a string called title and a string array of employers. So by passing in an array, we should be able to use a simple loop in our view to loop through and display each employer name. Now, starting next week, rather than hard coding the data in the controller, we will go and fetch it from the database instead. We'll use a model, we'll use our database, and we'll use our model to query the database and get a list. But we will pass it in our list in our res.render statement. Load the view and send it some data. Again, very similar to what we did in ASP.NET. So next we want to go back to our view and we should have access to this employers array. And we can use a loop in Handlebar syntax to display them. So I'm going to go back to my employers index. I'll create a UL. And then inside my handlebars, I can use the pound sign and an each. And we want to loop through our employers. So there's our each. It's got a pound symbol to start our loop and a / each to end our loop. And in here, I'm going to create a set of li tags. And then I can use the this variable to refer to the current item in the list. And in my handlebars syntax, we can now output the name of each element in the list. So it looks like this. Whatever's in our employer list in our controller, we can iterate through and display those things. Okay, so we have a little 3-page site so far. We've got our home page that the generator built, where we just changed the title. We've got just a static, a public about page. And we have our employer homepage where we can render some mock data using this handlebars loop. I do have one more task I want to do with this for today, fairly simple, which is just grab Bootstrap for this and a Bootstrap Navigation Bar. So we can make a little shared nav bar that's mobile responsive, where we've got a home link that with a header that says job tracker, and then we'd have about and employers links. So that way we can navigate around this little site. Now we could actually, Bootstrap is available as an NPM package, but for simplicity, we can just go and grab it using the Content Delivery Network instead. So I will just go to Get Bootstrap. And I'm just going to copy these. I've just put them in the chat. I'm going to open up my views and layout. I can paste it right in to my header. So I'll see the font change. And then we can just throw in a simple Bootstrap Navigation Bar into our layout file. So I've actually grabbed the Bootstrap Navbar here from their documentation. It's on Blackboard. So I'm just going to go and grab this nav. So I've linked to the source, simple Bootstrap Navbar. I'm going to throw it into our layout file, and then we can just make a couple little tweaks to it. So inside my body tag, but above the rendering of our page content, I'm just going to grab and paste that in. So this should be a collapsible navbar. So I've just put it after my opening body tag. So we get this. So I'm going to change a few things, or just want to change the text on the links and maybe change the color of it. I think I'm going to change the navbar light, BG light, to navbar dark. We'll customize it a bit later, and BG dark. Actually, I wonder if I do even BG like BG primary, that'll make it blue. Maybe. Yeah, sure. Here on line 18, where it has the class of navbar brand and it says navbar, I'm going to change the href just to a slash. So this is going to link to our home page. And I'll change the text in the link to say job tracker. I'll change my link down here to /about. I can say about. I'll change my second link to go to employers. And maybe I'll take these two links out for now. So we'll only have 3 links. The first link has the class of navvar brand, so it appears bigger. It links to the root and says job tracker. And then we have links to /about and /employers. I'm going to take out this aria current. So there's our Navbar. It says job tracker. So now we can kind of move around. Later on, I should probably anchor it to the top of the page. I guess I could use active here as well. It'll make all our links white. If I add this navbar and active class. There. So here's our little 3-page generator site where we've created one method in the controller that the generator gave us, and then one controller and method of our own. And again, we'll replace this with real data in our database starting next week. So everything we've done today, basically you have everything you need to do your portfolio. Right? So you're going to use the generator to set up the site. You're going to add methods or routes for about, projects, and contact. You're going to create those views. You'll create a nav bar that links to them. And then you're basically just populating it with content and doing your design and CSS work to showcase your skills. Okay, so the actual Express and Node part of the assignment is fairly brief. And the generator is going to handle most of the work for you. Okay, so next week we will start diving into MongoDB. It's a little bit of a different animal working with a non-relational database. It's different from the kinds of databases we've worked with before. I'm going to upload what we've done to GitHub. I'll get the videos up on YouTube shortly. So I will just go to my terminal and add my files again. I realize we did not put this up on Heroku today. You know what? We'll start that in class next week. We'll look at the deployment next week. So don't worry about our Heroku deployment for today. That's what we'll start class next week by getting this deployed up to the cloud. So you have no real homework for this week. Only thing to do is get started on your portfolio. So use the generator. Start thinking about the content you want in your portfolio. You can start your website. Okay, but you have a couple weeks to do it. Chris, I know you were maybe having an issue, so I'm happy to stay in the room and help you debug it. If anybody else has questions or needs some help, then I will stay in the WebEx room and happy to help you out. If not, I'll see you all next Wednesday. Have a great weekend.